Hey everyone, it's Tracy, and in the context of gaming, right? And you see this more and more, not just in traditional video games, but in sort of these gamified platforms, mostly relating to like crypto and sort of like quasi prediction markets. The concept of loot boxes, right? And there's this trend towards gamification of like everything, which I think is great, and I've talked about like a myriad of times before. But loot boxes or mystery boxes have all of a sudden garnered attention from various governments, regulators, what have you. And the question being, is it actual gambling, right? And so when you think about gambling, you really have three elements. You have consideration, right? You have to pay something of value to get into it. You have chance, right? Meaning it's not a game of skill where it's like dependent upon your ability to do something, but sort of a random chance. And then you have value, right? Meaning if you win, you receive something of value. So if you think about how loot boxes generally work, well, you have to provide consideration to have a chance. The awarding of whatever is in the loot box is purely random, right? So it has nothing to do with your abilities, chance, and then value. And so the discussion and like the decision of like what is really gaming not really focuses on that third component, which is value, right? And you can see value defined in like many different ways, but as it stands right now, value, right, in what is really just a very, very, very gray area, is whether or not the item one in the loot box has intrinsic value outside of the platform, meaning like can it be resold? So, and you know, in theory, that would define most loot boxes, but irrespective of how clear that analysis may be, nowhere in the United States, like they've discussed it, some like Hawaii and some other states have tried to ban it and restrict it in some way to people over 18, or and then in EU you see like the Netherlands actually has banned them, but there really hasn't been any wholesale attempt, and the emphasis has been less on do I need a gaming license and more on do I need like on consumer protection laws, right? Because you mostly have kids under 18 playing these games and getting into the loot box thing. So there's some best practices, right, that you can kind of use to avoid gaming together with the proper disclosures. One, as I mentioned before, the value of what you receive, right, from the loot box, if you win it, would only have value within the platform, right? And so if you think about, and this dovetails like with the licensing model of like utility tokens that I beat to death here, where it's like if it's a license, it can't be a security, but it only has intrinsic value to do something within the platform, right? When you use that token. Well, the same can be said for whatever's in this loot box. If it only has intrinsic value within the context of the game or the platform, that distorts, if you will, what is value, right? The third prong of like the gaming test. Second, you can also disclose what is in the loot box or the value of what is in the loot box prior to the actual contest itself, right? So if you have a loot box, in some kind of gamified trading or whatever the situation is, where that loot box, you can say, there's a value of $1,000, or it's something XYZ, a skin, whatever the case may be, that also intrinsically takes away the value element, because now I know what's in it, right? Now I know what I'm getting. It's not like this game of like, there's not a winner and loser per se, right? Because I understand what I'm getting into. And third is the third thing, which is very difficult to control, is the external market, right? One of the factors that's been brought up a lot in attempts to regulate loot boxes is whether there's an external market for whatever's in there, right? What you win. And that's hard to control, right? Like how, if it's like token based, right? You see these platforms, well, they give you tokens and like that. Well, how do you control if a market for that token is, pops up on the deck somewhere? You have no ability to like prevent that. And in the context of like a pure video game, yes, you can like confine like a skin or something like that just for use within that game. But as we gamify and we go into different, like, and again, it's really like moving towards prediction, right? Like almost away even from traditional like sports wagering and into like these sort of prediction type markets, which are further away from even like political events, and they look more like lotteries, right? Like how many platforms are there and apps out there now where you literally can bet on what the closing price of Bitcoin will be at a certain time, right? Well, that's like an old numbers game from like the 40s and 50s where like the last 3 digits of the Dow Jones was like the winning ticket, right? It's crazy, but that's how it kind of works. So if there's a way, right, to create this ecosystem where the loot box prize cannot be resold, right? And again, that's very hard to control. And obviously, there's exceptions, like what constitutes a market for that item, is very subjective. But that also brings you outside of the ambit of that third prong of the gaming test, which is value. So, like, I'm a huge proponent of all things gamification. I think financial services, right, are moving that way. Like, I talked to neobanking people, reach out to me about neobanking, things like that, and it's like it's all moving towards gamification, right? Like financial services, like crypto, anything. Gamification is 100% the route if you really want to like scale something, right? Because it's, let's be honest, it's addictive, right? It's like gaming, it's like actual gambling, right? So the gamification of it is important. These loot boxes or mystery boxes, or sometimes called, is a really big hitch for a lot of people to get onto these platforms, and not only to like play the game once, but to continue to play the game, right, and make further investments into the game, whether that's buying additional tokens or e-money, whatever the case may be. But the loot box regulation wave is coming, right? You already see the FTC looking at it, and again, it's more from a consumer protection angle right now, but you can see it possibly like on a state-by-state basis becoming classified as actual gaming, which would require a gaming license, which would really defeat the purpose of the loot box, right? So that having been said, that is the quick and dirty analysis of loot boxes. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. Message me through here, or Adam at Adam Tracy, TRACY.io, and I'll talk to you next time. Cheers.